Hi everyone, welcome back to our IGTV. We are cooking with olive oil today, and thank you to everybody who voted on our last Instagram poll and who chose the cooking with olive oil option for this video, because we are really excited to share one of our favorite quick recipes with you. And we're going to be highlighting in the recipe today our basil, extra virgin olive oil, and our Wallace Estate. So we're excited to get started.
But before we jump into the recipe today, we wanted to take a moment to remind you all that we currently have a sale going on the website through the end of the month. 15% of the proceeds are going to go to the Farm Worker Project and their Fire Relief Fund, which provides support to farm workers that are currently working to provide us all with the food that is on this table and on your table amidst the fires that are happening in California, and they've been working amidst the global pandemic. So they work to provide them with some support that they definitely need and deserve at this point. So we're really happy to be able to support them with whatever we can.
Yeah, and we will leave a direct link just to their donation page as well in case you wanted to donate directly to that organization. But as Kaylin said, our industry wouldn't exist without farm workers, and we're just really grateful that we can give back to their community in this small way.
Exactly.
So with that being said, we are going to dive into the recipe, and we are making bruschetta, just traditional bruschetta with tomatoes today, as well as garlic confit. So how we're going to break this down is I'm going to make the tomato bruschetta and Kaylin's going to make the garlic confit, so that one of us isn't just awkwardly standing in the corner watching the other one make that dish. So we are going to kick it off with the garlic confit. Kaylin is going to show you how to make that, featuring our Wallace Estate extra virgin olive oil.
So before I get into actually making the garlic confit, I wanted to talk a little bit about what a confit is and go through the ingredients that I'm going to be using to make the garlic confit today. So a confit is just any slow cooking of a food with a fat. So today we'll be using garlic and extra virgin olive oil, but any food slow cooked in a fat is considered a confit. So for today, we're going to be using 2 heads of garlic, bay leaf, and some dried thyme for extra flavor, and then a pinch of salt in the pan. And then we're going to be using our Wallace extra virgin olive oil, and we picked this one specific for the confit today because if you've watched our olive oil tasting videos, you'll remember that the Wallace is one of our more mild oils. So you cook a confit for a long time on very slow heat. So when you're exposing the olive oil to heat over a long period of time, you're going to cook out a lot of the characteristics that are going to be present in some of our bigger oils. So we're going to use one of our more mild oils since you're not really going to be getting a lot of that characteristic anyway. Now let's get into the making of the garlic confit. So for the first step, I'm going to take my 2 heads of garlic and I'm going to peel them so that each of the individual pieces are still intact, but they don't have any of the outer covering on them. Some recipes that I've seen actually say that you can leave the cloves in this like inner layer of skin when you put them in the pan to cook them, but I'm gonna actually peel them all today. I think it makes it a little bit easier on the serving side when you don't have anything that you need to peel away from the garlic once you want to use it. Though this process will take me a while on this end. So now we have all of the garlic peeled into individual cloves, which was not an easy feat, so thanks Em for helping me with that. And as we were peeling them, we just put them directly into the saucepan that we're going to be using to make the confit. So we have a pretty thin layer of garlic on the saucepan, and we're just going to add 1 bay leaf directly to it, and then a couple sprigs of dried thyme. This thyme is actually from our dad's garden, so thank you, Dad. We just dried it and we're going to put it in there. And then we're going to add the olive oil on top. I've read in recipes that you should add somewhere between like 1/2 cup to 2/3, but really you just want it to cover the garlic, so I'm just going to kind of eyeball it here and pour it in. Lots of olive oil goodness. Once you have all of your ingredients in the pan, you're going to transfer that over to the stovetop and turn it on to a low to medium heat until you start to see a simmer in the olive oil. Once you see that, you can turn it back down to a low heat, and you're just going to let it slowly cook at that low heat for about 30 to 40 minutes. So I'm going to take this and put it onto the stove. While that's cooking, I'm going to hand it over to Em, who's going to start putting together the rest of the recipe.
Okay, so now we're going to do the bruschetta portion of the recipe. I have a few ingredients here here I'd like to share. So first of all, I'm using about 1 to 2 cartons of cherry tomatoes, and you can use Roma tomatoes or heirloom, just depending on your preference and what is available to you. I chose cherry because they are particularly sweet at this time of year. And then I have a small bushel of fresh basil. I'll probably end up using about 6 to 7 leaves of that. And then I have pink Himalayan salt, a nice loaf of bread, and then I have our basil extra virgin olive oil, and you can use any of our olive oils for this, but I chose basil just to give it that added flavor, and I'm not going to use any other spices aside from salt. So I find that pairing it with the basil extra virgin olive oil really ensures that you have that complex flavor, but it's still fresh. So I'm using that. And then I also have our BV tradizionale, which is our older vinegar, and I'm using this one because it is very sweet and it pairs really nicely with the saltiness of tomatoes and of course salt, and it just goes really nicely with any loaf of bread that you have. So these are all the ingredients you need to make the bruschetta, and let's get started. Okay, so I've washed my cherry tomatoes and I'm just going to start cutting them in half. And if you are working with Roma tomatoes or heirloom tomatoes, any larger tomato, you probably want to seed them just so that the moisture of the tomato doesn't overtake the bruschetta and it doesn't sog up the bread. But I will show you a little trick that I do for these little cherry tomatoes, and as my knife skills are showing, I'm no professional, but this seems to work really nicely for me. So once I dice up all of these tomatoes, I'm actually going to lightly salt them, salt the insides of them, and then I'm going to place them face down on this napkin for about 5 to 10 minutes. That way you can draw out the moisture of the cherry tomatoes without having to seed them, and it just makes for a less messy bruschetta. So I will finish cutting these tomatoes and then I'll show you exactly how I salt them. Okay, so I have my tomatoes all diced, they look gorgeous, so I'm going to just salt them. And you don't have to measure for this, you can kind of just eyeball it, just over the top with the seeds facing up. And also I like doing this not only because it pulls out the moisture, but it adds flavor so that you don't have to salt your bruschetta once you plate it, because that salt is already absorbed right into the tomatoes. Once you are satisfied with how much salt is on your tomatoes, you can just start transferring them over to a dish towel or a paper napkin, whatever you have available, and you're going to put them face down. So salt side, seed side down. You're going to just arrange these and let them, like I said, sit for about 5 to 10 minutes, and you'll actually be able to see the moisture being pulled out of the tomatoes onto the napkin. Okay, so I have all of my tomatoes drying out over here, and while I wait for those to be ready, I'm going to ribbon the basil. So if you've never ribboned lettuce before, or an herb, what I do is I cut off the stems of them all, and then I take the basil and I just roll it up into kind of like a little basil burrito. And once I have it in burrito form, I will just cut small incisions down the line of the basil. And I like these ribbons because not only do they look beautiful on a plate, but they're also a nice way of spreading out the basil within the tomatoes. They have a lot of reach, so it's a good way to infuse that flavor all the way throughout your bruschetta. So I will finish ribboning these, and then we can get to incorporating the tomatoes, basil, and extra virgin olive oil together. Okay, the basil is ribboned and our tomatoes have had time to dry out, so I'm just going to incorporate the two. I'm going to transfer the tomatoes first into a glass bowl, and then I will add the basil. And at this point, you can also add the extra virgin olive oil, and depending on how much acidity you like in your bruschetta, you could also add some vinegar at this point too, but I'm just going to keep the vinegar for the very end. Like I said, just drizzle it on top once it's all plated. Okay, so we have all the tomatoes in there. I'm just going to incorporate the basil now, the fresh basil, and give it a little mix with clean hands. And then you can drizzle the basil extra virgin olive oil over that. And again, just kind of eyeballing this, but you want to have enough where it's going to permeate all of the layers of the tomatoes in the bowl. And then if you don't want to get your hands oily, you can kind of just stir like this. Just incorporate that olive oil, make sure it is covering all of the cherry tomatoes, and then you can go ahead and set that aside. And that's actually going to sit a little bit by itself so that it absorbs the basil extra virgin olive oil that I just added. And while we're waiting for that, we can actually go ahead and cut the bread. Okay, so I'm using a Levant loaf, but you can use a baguette for a more traditional bruschetta, or any bread really that you have around your house. And with a loaf, I prefer to just cut it straight, but if you do have a baguette, it's kind of fun to do a cut on the bias, so it looks a little bit more like nice crostini. But I'm just going to cut into this. Again, just depending on your preference, you can make your slices as thick or as slim as you like. I like somewhere a little bit in the middle so that it absorbs that olive oil and balsamic. So because it's Kayla and I eating these, I'm just going to cut two. And I prefer to toast my bread on the stove top with a little bit of extra virgin olive oil. I find that it gives it a nicer crisp this way and also a beautiful color. So I'm going to just do that. And of course you can use whatever kind of olive oil that you have on hand, but because I use the basil in the tomatoes, I'm actually going to use one of our estate oils to dress the bread. So I am reaching for our Napa Valley blend, and this is one of our bigger oils. I'm using this for the bread because it's not going to have much cooking time on the stove, so those flavors and that complexity will be preserved in the bread. So I'm just going to drizzle that on top here. I have dressed both sides of those in olive oil just because I am going to toast both sides of the bread. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then I will meet you back here when we are ready to plate.
So we transferred the garlic confit into a mason jar for storage, and we'll just be using a couple cloves per piece of bread for now, and the rest we'll get to use for later yumminess.
And since it's so soft, you can kind of just smear it onto the bread. And a typical traditional bruschetta recipe calls for raw garlic to be rubbed on the bread, but we find that the garlic confit is a lot nicer because it has an element of sweetness in it.
Yeah, it's a lot softer, so you're not going to get quite as much protein. So here are 3 pieces. And oh yeah, it's like butter.
This is also a really nice and easy way to infuse your own olive oil at home as well, because the olive oil that's left over in here is going to carry all of the flavor aspects of this garlic. Okay, so once we put the garlic on, we can incorporate the tomatoes and basil. You give that a nice little mix and make sure your basil leaves aren't sticking together. You can kind of just literally plate your tomatoes on the bread.
Oh, looks delicious.
Now for the final step. So we're just going to do a little balsamic drizzle. Like I said, this is our aged balsamic, so it has a really nice sweetness and density to it. Voila. Okay, and that's it. You don't have to add salt because, like I talked about earlier, we already incorporated the salt with the tomatoes, so it's already infused with that flavor, and now we can just plate it and enjoy. Okay, that concludes our first cooking with olive oil video. We hope that you all enjoyed, and we would love to see if you make this recipe at your own home.
We'd also love to hear from you guys what you're interested in us cooking in the future, so drop us a note if you have any suggestions. Otherwise, see you next time.
See you next time.